Dr. Gromacki, thanks for being with us today. This is a treat for our viewers. We're going to ask you some general questions about prophecy first and then get into some of your areas of expertise specifically. Where do you think we are in the times of the end? Can you just give us some statements about that?
Well, as you look at the world picture, we're seeing increase in anti-Semitism around the world. Just hearing some reports and seeing some things on the internet of just the continued rise of anti-Semitism, and this is, I think, an evidence of the end times as we approach the final 7-year tribulation period, where there'll be very increased anti-Semitism there. Also, as we look at Jerusalem and what's happening there, the attempt to try to bring the capital to Jerusalem, in terms of Israel, we'd like to say that I believe that Jerusalem is the eternal capital of the nation state of Israel, and I think it's important that the world recognize that fact. I think that as we look at what's happening on the Temple Mount, there's obviously a lot of interest among Jews to see a third temple be built, and even the Temple Mount faithful and several groups in Jerusalem preparing for a future temple. So all of those things are exciting as we consider the fact that we're coming to the end times, and I do believe that Yeshua, Jesus, is going to come back. I believe in a pre-tribulation rapture of the church. I believe that it is imminent, that it could happen at any time. And because of that, I don't believe there has to be any signs that are fulfilled in order for Jesus to come back. But I think that the world stage is being set up for the end time tribulation period, and I think that's important.
Seems like 50 years ago, only historians and students of religions, world religions, would understand this resurgence of Islam and the incredible power that it's growing around the world. Speak a little bit about the rise of Islam regarding the Temple Mount and the rewriting of history with Al-Quds versus Jerusalem.
Yeah, I think that when you look at world history, there's always been a sort of a battle for Jerusalem, and you can go back to the Crusades and what happened back there in terms of the Temple Mount, and of course I believe that there's been 2 temples on the Temple Mount. You have Solomon's temple that was destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians 586 BC, and then the second temple was renovated by Herod the Great, destroyed by Titus and the Romans in AD 70. So since that time, since AD 70, the Jews have not had a temple on the Temple Mount, but we've seen conflicts over that piece of geography, very important. And I think it's because God made His presence known on that Temple Mount. And we know that that's where the Jews worship God. Now today, of course, the Jews go to the Western Wall to pray for another temple to be built. Of course, on top of the Temple Mount, we have the Mosque of Omar, the Dome of the Rock, the gold building there, beautiful building. Had the opportunity of being on the Temple Mount. I've gone inside, I've seen the rock inside, supposedly the place where Abraham was going to slay his son Isaac, and God kept him from doing that, and He offered the ram instead of his son. It's interesting that that Temple Mount, you have the Dome of the Rock, and it was actually a church when the Crusaders conquered, and then Saladin came and defeated the Crusaders, and so reestablished the Muslim presence there. And then you think of like 1967, when the Israelis actually conquered the Temple Mount, and they were there, and Rabbi Shlomo Goren actually blew the shofar, and there was sort of a rejoicing of Jewish people with the opportunity of going to worship there once again. So I think that as we look at that, we recognize that there is going to come a time when a third temple will be built. As you look at the Daniel prophecy, chapter 9, verses 24 through 27, the 70 weeks prophecy, I believe that the 483 years of that prophecy has been fulfilled. And we have the 70th week of Daniel, which is a 7-week or 7-year period of time. And it says in Daniel 9:27 that the prince, the Roman prince, will make a covenant with Israel for 7 years, and that halfway through that period of time, 3.5 years in, he's going to put a stop to sacrifice and offering. So I do believe that a third temple will be built. Now the question is, when will that happen? Will it happen before the rapture of the church? Will it happen after the rapture? Does it happen after the signing of this covenant of, I believe, the Antichrist, the Roman prince of Daniel 9, signs this covenant with Israel? Does it happen then? Well, all we know is that there will be a temple by the middle of the tribulation period.
When we bring our groups to Israel, I like to stand on the Mount of Olives with them and say you're seeing a Muslim mosque on a Crusader church, on a Jewish temple, on a promised land. And the layer cake effect, the tell really of the entire country, but that layering of the archaeological changes is being contested now. Last season we heard about this UNESCO fiasco regarding there's been no Jewish presence there, and always there's this pressure to rethink history, rewrite history, and I believe that leads to the deception that's engulfing the world right now. We see it also in Europe, what's happening in Europe, and I recently heard about this pressure against believers in Russia. Catherine and I have a deep affection for Russia. We did marriage seminars there, in a very young church that we planted. And you spent some time there. I don't think the Western audience really understands that there's as much Christianity in the East as there is in the West. The entire eastern side of the church has been a phenomenal foundational work. What's going on there now regarding the gospel and these end times events?
Well, as you look at Russia, I think that we understand that it does going to have a play in the final end times, especially as you look at Ezekiel 38 and 39. It talks about Rosh and Gog and Magog, and when you look at contemporary geopolitical situation right now, especially with Russia and Iran, it's very interesting when you look at Ezekiel 38 and 39, you have Persia is mentioned as one of the countries that will come against Israel in the end times. So when you look at that and you look at what's happening with Turkey now, with Russia and Turkey and the alliance there, it seems to be a Muslim alliance. Russia, Turkey, Iran. If you want to bring in Syria, which is referenced in Daniel as the king of the north, it sort of, lines up with what the scripture says about an end-time invasion of Israel in Ezekiel 38 and 39.
You say a Muslim alliance, and yet there's a tremendous Christian history in Russia.
That is true, and that's an interesting thing. I mean, when you think about how Christianity came from Greece into Russia with the Greek missionaries impacting the nation. You have really as you look at Russia, the former Soviet Union, it's more the southern Russian republics down there, those nation states that sort of broke away in the former Soviet Union that are more Islamic, yes. Whereas in the north and Moscow would be more, we would say, Greek Orthodox.
The stands, all those nations in the south. I heard from my Israeli friends that the Israelis are watching their northern border because of the activity of Hezbollah, and the scuttlebutt is that the next time something happens in the north, they will pull what they call a Putin, which apparently he will just go in and level an entire Muslim area, and no one will ever know about it. Do you see those things happening? The tension between the centralized government of Russia and the Islamic insurgency in the south?
I think that as again looking at Ezekiel 38 and 39, that prophecy, I see that it says that this coalition of nations will come against Israel when they're unprotected and unwalled villages. So the question is how does that relate to our particular time? Because Israel, of course, has their defense shield up, so to speak, to protect the nation. We've got rockets being sent from Gaza into Israel, and of course, in the past, as you said, Hezbollah in the north and from Lebanon invading, just terrorist type activities in the north. So I think that Israel has their defense up. So the question is, as you look at Ezekiel 38 and 39, in what sense will this invasion come? It seems to be almost like a time of peace. So how is that going to happen? I'm not sure. As I look at what's going on right now, I don't think we can be dogmatic and say. I do think that as you look at the various nations, states, it's very interesting to see the alignment of the Ezekiel 38 and 39 nations. Possibly there's going to be some type of security arrangement agreement with Israel for protection, that maybe they would be less on the defensive. But right now, just with the terrorist situation and anti-Semitism, it seems like their defenses are up.
Past few decades, there's been an assurance, in a sense, that the Antichrist, the anti-Messiah, will come out of Rome, the revised Roman Empire. And then there's an uptick in the idea that there's an Islamic Antichrist. Because of the antithetical nature of Islamic ideology, it seems the most obvious. How do you see that playing out?
Yeah, I personally hold to the Antichrist being a Gentile ruler of the West. As I look at Daniel 9:24 to 27, in that prophecy of the 70 weeks, two events happen from the end of the 483rd year to the beginning of the 484th year. And what is that? Well, you have the Messiah is cut off, okay, which is approximately 30 to 33 AD. Then you have the destruction of Jerusalem, which was about 40 years later, AD 70. Titus and the Romans came. And it says there in that prophecy that the people of the prince who is to come will destroy the city. So that was Titus and the Romans. So when it comes to Daniel 9:27, it says he will make a covenant with many for 1 week, one heptad in the Hebrew, which is a 7-year period of time. The pronoun references back to the prince who is of the people who destroyed Jerusalem. So that's my argument for the Roman prince, a Gentile ruler of the West, and that's my understanding that he will be the one who will make this covenant with Israel.
That's good. There's always been an idea, there's been heresies, in fact, abounding about the lost tribes of Israel and the Anglo-Israelism, that every believer in Jesus in the West is actually Jewish, and all kinds of what we say in Yiddish is mishigas, craziness. However, there are peoples being discovered in Africa and India who have been keeping Jewish tradition for many, many centuries. What's your view of the end times and the gathering of those seemingly lost to us but not to God Jewish people?
Well, again, I think it's interesting when you look at Revelation chapter 7, it says that 12,000 from each of the 12 tribes of Israel will make up the 144,000 Jewish witnesses. So God knows the genetics, the DNA of all people. We may not even know our own DNA. I know Gromacki, Polish name. I was told by my uncle that come from the Poland-Russian border, right? I don't know if I have any Jewish blood in me or not, but
I think we might be cousins.
Only God knows that, okay? So I think it's fascinating when I look at Revelation chapter 7 and see that 12,000 from the 12 tribes. And who's to say that some of those individuals wouldn't be from Africa?
There's some overlapping of the ages, where there seems to be it's not a clear-cut dispensational change from, okay, now this new place has started, but there's this overlapping. I know there are rabbis now that are dreaming into a messianic age to come, and of course believers looking for Jesus. What about the times of the Gentiles? Some people say 1967 was the beginning of the end of the times of the Gentiles when Jerusalem came back to the Jewish people. But again, there's some overlapping as well because there's more to come during tribulation, isn't there?
Yeah, when you look at Luke 21, Jesus in the Olivet Discourse gave his prediction of the end time events. And he said in Luke 21:24 that Jerusalem will be trampled underfoot by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. That's the only place in the New Testament, in the Bible, where the phrase times of the Gentiles is found. Now, my personal view on the times of the Gentiles is it started in 586 BC. And this is when Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians came and destroyed Jerusalem. All right? From 586 BC all the way through our present time, there has been no Davidic king sitting on the throne of David ruling Israel. And that's a very important point as we think about the times of the Gentiles. During the times of the Gentiles, we have Daniel 2 and Daniel 7 becoming very important here. Nebuchadnezzar had a dream of the image. You had the gold head, the silver arms, the brass belly, the iron legs, and the feet of iron and clay. Each one of these metals on the metallic man represented various Gentile powers. Nebuchadnezzar, the head of gold, would be Babylon. The arms of silver, Medo-Persia. The brass belly represents Greece. The iron legs, Rome. And all of those Gentile powers dominated Israel at one time in the past. The final form of the Roman Empire, the 10 toes on the image made partly of iron and clay, I believe it references a future form of the Roman Empire. Also, you find in Daniel chapter 7, Daniel had a dream of 4 beasts. You had a winged lion representing Babylon. You had a bear with ribs in its mouth representing Medo-Persia. You had a winged leopard representing Greece. And then you had a 10-horned monster beast. Now it's interesting, you have 10 horns on the beast, you have 10 toes on the image. I believe that refers to a final form of this Roman Empire. Daniel chapter 7 talks about the Antichrist being a little horn that comes up after the 10 horns and plucks up 3. So I personally believe that there's going to be a final form of the Roman Empire. Maybe it's a Western power. And I believe that the Antichrist will be a Gentile who will come to power. I don't believe that the times of the Gentiles will end until the second coming of Yeshua at the end of the tribulation period. So from 586 BC all the way to the second coming of Jesus to the earth to reign as king, we have the times of the Gentiles. It's a time when there is no Jewish king sitting on the throne of David. Jesus Christ is coming back. He's going to sit on the throne of David, ruling Israel and the whole world from Jerusalem. And we're told in Ezekiel that he will sit on his throne in the millennial temple. So that's something that we can all look forward to, a time of peace in the world.
That is our hope, and he's the only king that we can fully trust.
That's right.
Only world leader, only king we can fully trust. Dr. Gromacki, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.